We will now turn to keynote presentations. First, from OECD, Directorate for Education and Skills, Head of the Policy Advice and Implementation Division, Dr. Paulo Santiago, will talk about school attendance problems from an internationally comparative perspective. Dr. Santiago, you have the floor.
Arigato. Good morning. I'm sorry that I won't be presenting in Japanese. It's only my first time in Japan, so I will need a few more visits. So first of all, my appreciation to the Ministry of Education. Also my congratulations for opening up this discussion in Japan internationally, opening up this discussion for international peer learning. Because indeed this is an issue that has been growing in different countries. Many countries are struggling with the issues of school attendance, in particular after the COVID pandemic. So this is actually an area in which there's a lot of potential for learning across countries. So today I'm going to be presenting some work, international work, from a comparative perspective. At the OECD, this work is being conducted by a project that is called Education for Inclusive Societies, very much in the context of our work on equity and inclusion, on underperformance, so that we can make sure that everybody has an opportunity to reach their potential at the school level. We have been working together with a range of countries in this particular area. So this is the outline. I'm going to be speaking a little bit about international trends in this area. There's not a lot of comparative indicators because countries define school attendance quite differently, so the measures are not necessarily comparable. And then I will be showing some results on a policy survey that we conducted in a range of countries, which already provides a perspective in particular of the approaches that are being followed in the countries. And then I'll be talking a little bit about main takeaways of peer learning sessions we've been organizing. The OECD, at the request of countries, has been working with different countries in terms of generating learning in terms of the experiences. It's an area where essentially countries are telling us we don't know much, there's not a lot of evidence internationally, but would like very much to know how the other countries are addressing this issue so that they can take immediate action. So first, some words about international trends. As I said, it's an area in which it's difficult to provide you with indicators that compare countries, simply because countries use very different definitions and the way they measure school attendance is different. For instance, defining what is an absence and how many days a student needs to be absent to basically be considered an absence. So there's no really indicators internationally where we can compare countries. So the only thing available is actually from PISA. PISA has a student questionnaire, and we ask the students about their own absences. So these are data that are perceptions. So the 15-year-olds, as you know, they take PISA, and we ask them to report whether they've skipped a whole school day or at least a few classes in the 2 weeks prior to taking the PISA test. And then we get an average per country, and then we can compare across the different cycles of PISA to see whether there is a trend. And interestingly, and a little bit a surprise to us, in terms of the average, when you take all the OECD countries taking PISA, we've not seen an increase in school absences. So here you can see that actually between 2018 and 2012 to 22, there's been a slow decrease. So there's no significant phenomenon in terms across the all countries. However, there's a lot of heterogeneity. So here you can see the trend or the evolution across for many different countries, and you can see that it goes a little bit into all directions depending on the countries. However, there are some countries, those with a dark blue line, for which there's been a consistent increase in student truancy as defined in this chart. So you can see that in countries like Greece, Ireland, New Zealand, Denmark, Norway, there have been consistent increases as measured by the perceptions of the students themselves. You can see that Japan is quite low compared to other countries. This is for 15-year-olds when the students are also getting serious about their college entrance examination, for instance. And the other country next to Japan is actually Korea. So there's also an element of culture in this. But the idea is, in some countries, yes, it's clearly consistent, the trend. This is not an ideal measure in any case, because it's also perceptions of students. There's only one country for which there's a consistently decrease, actually. Out of curiosity, it is Croatia. Then the same measure now, but across, take into account different characteristics to see whether there's an influence. First, you can look at whether, and we compare for 2012 and 2022, you can compare and assess whether there's a gender component, where the student truancy differs for genders, where there's whether boys or girls are actually have a tendency to be more absent or not. And it's really not the case. On average, at the OECD level, it actually, on average, for 2012, for boys, there were more absences. In 2022, is for girls. But you can see that across countries, there's great variability. There's countries for which boys have higher truancy and girls higher truancy in some other countries. So there's really no clear pattern here in terms of the influence of gender. When you look at school location, whether the schools are based in a remote location or in cities, the same phenomenon happens. There's no really differences in truancy by school location in 2022. In some countries, there is, the ones at the extreme. For countries like Switzerland, Austria, and Belgium, it happens more often in cities. For countries like Chile, Bulgaria, New Zealand, more in villages, in remote areas. Things change when you look at a socioeconomic disadvantage. In this particular case, you can see that when you look at students who have parents educated with higher education, they tend to be less absent. When students have parents with no tertiary education, they actually tend to be more absent. So there's an element of socioeconomic disadvantage, and we can see that in the literature. Socioeconomic advantage tends to potentiate absences. The same goes with an immigrant background. There's also a tendency for higher absences with an immigrant background. This is true in almost all countries. And it's also true in Japan, as you can see with the red bar. There is also another measure that looks at different types of absences. This is long-term absence. So you ask 15-year-olds whether they have missed school for more than 3 months at any point in their education trajectory since primary school. And the point here is, I mean, there's considerable difference between countries. Here there's no data for Japan. Korea is at the very bottom. New Zealand, Colombia higher up. But the main point of the chart is also to show that there's a difference between, again, disadvantaged children, non-disadvantaged, and immigrant, non-immigrant with the same pattern. In terms of long-term absences, we also ask the students the reasons why they were absent for so long. There's a great variety of reasons. Of course, for long-term absences, the main reason is being sick. However, it's interesting to note that there's a considerable percentage of students that are actually absent for other important reasons, like I did not feel safe or I felt bored at school, which basically raises questions about other main reasons why they are absent. So this was as an introduction, and again, I would highlight that we don't have good comparable data across countries. So what we did is, as a result, and because countries were asking very much us to work in this area, was to try to collect data about, in particular, policy practices to address issues of school attendance. So the data we decided to develop is basically out of the result of that absence of data. There's a range of international studies who tend to be focused very much on the national level issues and interventions at the national level, and it's particularly they are particularly important in the United States and North America. That's where more studies exist. But of course, this issue of student absences is very much contextual, and the context matters a lot, so it's important to have a wider range of information. So we decided to collect information about policy frameworks at the system level to address school attendance problems. So we launched this survey on the 30th of April, 25, across European Union countries, OECD countries, OECD accession countries. Is work also funded by the European Commission, and we basically aim to collect information on policies and practices and definitions, monitoring practices, etc. It covers all levels of education. We have received 45 submissions from 45 different educational jurisdictions from 34 countries, and we're going to use this information to publish a comparative report, which will become available only in 2026, in June 26, so it's not yet available, so I'll be presenting very preliminary results. We basically review things such as definitions. As I said, they're quite different across countries. What are the monitoring tools that the countries use? What are the drivers? And then initiatives at the level of governance, capacity building, and school level interventions. So very preliminary results of the survey. One question, for instance, is what is the frequency and the extent to which schools report data at the system level on absences? And interestingly, you can see that the most typical answer is once a year. So schools tend to report data at the system level for once a year only. Then there's higher frequency, but not a lot of countries do it in real time or daily. Just a few, and you will actually see examples today of that particular practice. A second element is the importance of collecting data disaggregated by the type of student and the characteristics of the school in order to investigate whether there's a particular concern with particular groups in terms of absences. And countries do collect data, most often on gender, differentiation, socioeconomic status, and special needs. There's other elements of diversity, such as ethnicity, immigrant background, which also, for privacy reasons, they're not collected. An interesting case study is that of New Zealand, which collects data, daily attendance figures will become available at aggregate level in an interactive dashboard. It's very much uploaded automatically from schools' data, that they need to input that data in their systems daily with no extra administrative costs, can be disaggregated by school level, region, according to the school equity index of the school. And most importantly, this data is actually combined and integrated in a broader data infrastructure where there is also data about the socioeconomic household data, and also labor market data, health data, so that you can actually be able to connect the absences to broader sets of data, and this allows you to do quite a lot of research on the impact, for instance, of absences. And then New Zealand has, through this data, come up with a range of conclusions that you can see. So if a student is absent, they're less likely to attain and finish up a secondary education. They are more likely to be disengaged from work and receive welfare benefits, more likely to be charged with an offense. So because you integrate this in a broader set of data, you can actually get into analysis and research and look at the consequences of daily absences of students. You will see other examples today about this real-time collection of data. In terms of preventative measures, when we ask the countries about the type of interventions they have in terms of preventative measures, you can see that there's family support programs, things like the family engaging officers in Wales, whereby there's an organization with dedicated staff who actually engages with the family, interacts with them, knows their situation, and provides measures to actually respond to particular individual issues in those families. Other measures, awareness-raising campaigns, requirements for schools to develop all school belonging policies, requirements to provide incentive programs for students or families. For instance, if a student misses a school for a number of years, or for a number of days, they might not be able to go to the next grade. So there's a range of initiatives that countries develop. Another preventative type of measure, it's actually to make sure that the curriculum is engaging, because a broader issue beyond attendance is also the issue of engagement, interest to go to school, interest in learning. So there's a lot of range of initiatives that you can develop at the curriculum level in terms of giving flexibility to schools to adapt the curriculum, to make learning more interesting, to engage students, and to make them want to come to school. So that's another type of. Then you also have responsive type of policies. When the issue already happens, you can actually provide measures to engage, to respond to particular issues. Typically, school counselors are most commonly engaged after a period for a student absence. It's very typical, but other types of non-teaching staff can be involved depending on the origin and the reasons why the student is absent. School psychologists, for instance, in the case of mental health issues, also homeschool liaison officers when the issue is also the situation at home in terms of poverty issues, for instance. Social workers can also intervene. Here you can see how many of the systems that responded to the survey have this type of interventions. Then other types of system-level policies include, for instance, alternative education provision for hospitalized students, counseling and psychological support, remedial instruction for students who return to school, the use of digital technologies to adapt to certain needs of certain students, changes to assessments for the students who come back to school, reintegration plans, peer support programs. So there's a range of other responses to respond to particular needs. It's also important to say that most of the systems have centrally defined guidelines on how to address students' absence, and we'll see an example today from Norway about that. Then another thing that is important to recognize is the fact that the issue of school attendance is quite holistic in nature. It goes way beyond school, and there's many issues that actually have an impact on the attendance of students, things such as poverty, mental health issues. So the solutions and the responses need also to take that into account. One particular aspect is also to prepare the teachers, where the teacher training and professional programs exist to address student absenteeism. In most countries, it's not the case. There's no particular requirement that teachers engage in professional development to address the particular issue of student absenteeism. But in some countries, such as Romania, in which there are programs for teachers who are in schools where there are high shares of students who are at the risk of dropout. At the same time, several countries, only 15 out of 40, also have a policy framework that requires that student attendance and absences should be part of initial teacher education. Another aspect is to go beyond the school and have aspects such as school evaluation in the context of development of school development plans. Some countries make the requirement or encourage schools to actually take into account school attendance and then develop strategies to increase school attendance. In most countries which have external evaluation, there's also a requirement that external school evaluation looks at school absences. Very briefly now, we also organize, because many countries told us that they had this problem, they asked us to put together a project, and one of the things that we did, because it has an immediate impact, is actually peer learning discussions. So we put together 3 countries, Ireland, Norway, and Slovak Republic, together in 3 different peer learning activities, each concentrating on a topic. The first one on monitoring school attendance problems, drivers and consequences of school attendance problems in the second workshop, and the third one about policy responses. And countries basically come together, they discuss among themselves, they share their policies and the responses they're giving to the issues. And we also brought observer systems such as England, Finland, Netherlands, New South Wales in Australia, and other participants such as academics, researchers, NGOs, and other international organizations to discuss the issue. And it's a very quick, efficient way of learning. So on the first peer learning activity, we did review the issue of monitoring school attendance problems. And it's a very important element. The first thing to do is really to develop a data infrastructure that allows you to get knowledge about the particular situation of school attendance, monitoring it, and also preparing the data for further research on the issue. So very much countries face similar challenges in linking student data to assess the policy interventions and go beyond education data to link to labor market data, to health data. So the countries face such challenges. Research also tells us that clearly any type of absence, including just a few days a year, have a negative impact for all students, but particularly for disadvantaged students. Also, the fact that some countries are engaging in automated data collection systems, but these need to be careful and include data verification and also data protection teams to support those. They're not so easy to implement. The fact that early warning systems are emerging but remain underdeveloped and risk mislabeling and also stigmatization of students. And the fact that more qualitative data on well-being, family context, and mental health are needed to understand and address school attendance problems more effectively in a more holistic manner. A second peer learning event looked at drivers and consequences of school attendance problems. School attendance problems basically bring together a range of concerns. It's not only about the student and the activities at the schools, it's about the individual, the family, the community, and systemic factors such as mental health, socioeconomic status, school climate, the transitions between levels of education. Another interesting issue is that the students, the teachers, and the parents, they tend to perceive the causes quite differently. Disadvantaged students and special needs students, minority students are most affected. So this calls for targeted interventions that are targeted at these particular groups. COVID-19 worsened with attendance issues and increased causal absences, casual absences, heightened mental health issues, and greater demand for flexible learning environments. So in a way, the COVID changed quite a lot the nature of the issue of school attendance, and this is actually calling for different types of responses. That included actually new attitudes of parents and students themselves towards learning. Again, transitions very important to pay attention to, and the fact that also less punitive and more tailored approaches are being called for. The final peer learning event looked at the solutions, what countries are doing to address issues of school attendance. One particular approach is the typical multi-tiered approaches where there's policies at the university for all students, some targeted for special groups and then more intensive for the most difficult groups, and adapted to local context, the shift from punitive actions to well-being, inclusion and early supportive type of interventions, the focus on the root causes, including taking into account issues of poverty, mental health, social isolation, the fact that one needs to also take into account engagement, that is a main motivator of students coming to school, issues also of school safety, school climate, cyberbullying, bullying at school, which have been increasing since the pandemic, and the need to combine in-school and out-of-school interventions with family-centered support, including support for parents themselves. So finally, we'll be basically putting all this together, basically bringing together evidence from the research, from our policy survey, examples of policy interventions from countries in a comparative report. Will be published in June 2026. And this will include results, more detailed results of the policy survey, and it will be disseminated widely, and we very much available also to support countries and engage in peer learning activities and targeted support to countries if they have an interest in that. So thank you very much, and I look forward also to the further discussion. Here you have information about the project overall, and you can consult the work on more broadly on equity and inclusion and diversity at the OECD. Arigato.
Thank you very much, Dr. Santiago. Next, I would like to call upon Mr. Ryoei Chijiwa, Director of the Student Affairs Division, Elementary and Secondary Education Bureau of the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, to talk about the Japanese situation. Hello, everyone. My name is Chijiwa. I am the Director of the Student Affairs Division, as I was introduced. As it was explained at the beginning, in terms of the objective of today's forum, well, I would like to first of all thank Dr. Adapalo from OECD, Sophie-san from the UK, and Linda-san from Norway, and also Brian-san from the US. It is around 11:30 p.m. in the US right now. And I would like to thank Brian-san for staying up so late to participate in this forum. So Dr. Santiago from OECD has given us the overview of the school absenteeism overall. Today, I will be talking about the current status in Japan. And I would like to lead that presentation to the later panel discussion today. So I hope to entertain you with my presentation. So this slide is something that's familiar to the Japanese audience. This is the organization of the school system in Japan. I would like to start out with the basics. As you can see, from 6 years old to 12 years old, it's compulsory education. From 12 to 15, it's the junior high school. So up to that is the compulsory education. So there are kindergarten, prior to elementary schools, and after graduating the junior high school, most of the children will go to the high schools, and that would be followed by the colleges and universities. Today, I will be mainly focusing on the school absenteeism in the up to the compulsory education stage. This gives you the overview of the education system in Japan. Ministry of Education, prefectural boards of education, and the municipalities are the players involved in the school education. There are municipal schools. Those are the elementary schools and junior high schools. Municipal schools, municipalities would be running those schools. The prefectural schools are mainly the high schools run by prefectures. And the boards of education of each prefecture would be responsible for the implementation of the education. So the municipal governments are primarily responsible for providing the education. The prefectural governments would be providing advice to the municipalities. The Ministry of Education, the central government, would establish the institutional framework of education, establishes national standards, and also create the national curriculum. In addition, Ministry of Education is responsible for securing financial resources for the improvement of educational conditions and provide guidance, advice, and assistance to the local governments. So there are allocation of roles and responsibilities to various parties that you see on this slide. From the context of the school absenteeism, the central government is collecting the information from the prefectural governments, the school absenteeism, and also the national government that created Kokolo Plan, which is a countermeasure for the school absenteeism. The Ministry of Education provides support to the activities conducted at the prefectural level through the funding measures. Before moving on to talk about schools absenteeism, I have brought a slide in terms of the fundamental roles of school education. Japan is a very small country. It is not resource-rich. Because of this, Japan has placed a lot of importance in the human resources and education. So we have Basic Act on Education, and it designates the legal role of education in Japan. Education must be provided with the aim of fully developing the individual character as we endeavor to cultivate people who are sound in mind and body and imbued with the qualities necessary for a peaceful and democratic nation and society. And under that, we see compulsory school attendance. Based on our constitution, all the children are granted the right to receive an equal education, and the people who have children under their protection must have their children receive an ordinary education. So how does Japan define school absenteeism? Dr. Santiago talked about the definition of a school absenteeism and that it varies. Each country has different definitions of school absenteeism. So how about Japan? You see that on the slide. the students who are having psychological burden concerning life in a group at school or on any other grounds which is specified by the Ministry of Education. And the criteria for school absenteeism in Japan is defined as 30 or more days of absence in an academic year. So from the perspective of providing support to non-attending students, so in 2016, Act on Securing Educational Opportunities Equivalent to Regular Education in the Compulsory Education Stage, etc., had been enacted. One of the aims is to secure educational opportunities for non-attending pupils and students. And basic principles includes ensuring a school environment that allows all pupils and students to lead fulfilling school lives and receive education with peace of mind. Also, provision of necessary support corresponding to individual circumstances of the non-attending students are included. So sorry, this slide is very busy, but as the Director General mentioned, this is the basic principles for supporting non-attending pupils and students. So this is what Japan has established for the support of non-attending pupils. The aim is not just having the students come back to the schools, and we need to be able to support the students to be independent. And we need to recognize various needs of the students. And in terms of the significance and role of school education, the school has an important role to play, and there needs to be effort made to welcome the students into the school. School is a place where students cultivate the zest for living that is useful in the real world through various experiences and interaction with many people. So we need to enhance the life at the school. In terms of the support of non-attending pupils and students, as well as their parents and guardians, are stipulated in this basic principle. So from here, I would like to mention a little bit about the data. The long-term school absenteeism situation. It is not just absenteeism, but also there are children who are absent from school because of economic reasons as well as their health reasons. 500,000 students, which is 5.5% of the total as of 2024. So from the context of absenteeism, non-attending students, 354,000 are not attending schools, approximately 3.8%, which has been a record high. As you can see in this graph, since COVID, there has been a significant increase in the non-attending pupils and students. If we look more in detail, from 2023 to 2024, the curve of increase had declined. I will be explaining about this. But we are taking initiatives to tackle the non-attending students' issues. So we are seeing some fruitful results from that, but it's still a big problem. I would like to go more into the details. There has been increase in the non-attending pupils and students, but the number of new cases of non-attending pupils and students at the compulsory education level has slightly declined. So there has been some changes surrounding the situation of the non-attending pupils. Skipping one slide, I would like to go to this slide, which shows the number of non-attending pupils and students by grade level, from first grade to the ninth grade. As children grow older, there is an increase in the number of non-attending students. First graders and the eighth graders. As of 2024, compared to 2023, the number of non-attending students had declined. The next slide shows the breakdown of the long-term non-attending students in the UK. I think there will be an explanation about their categorization of the non-attending students. So the students who are not attending schools for more than 30 days are the non-attending pupils as defined in Japan, and 54.2% are not attending the schools for more than 90 days. So there are shades of long-term absent students. On this slide, it summarizes facts identified regarding non-attending pupils and students, and there are various factors that led to not going to school. The fifth from the right, one of the biggest numbers of consultation was there were consultations regarding issues with the daily life rhythm. There were the consultations regarding a lack of motivation for school life, and also there were consultations regarding anxiety and depression, and also there were consultations about not being able to do homework or have issues with relationship with friends. But as you can see from here, there are a variety of reasons why students started not going to school. So this is the last slide of the data. So there are 350,000 students who are unattending students to school. But we need to secure a situation where those students would also be able to learn. The non-attending pupils and students, whether they have received specialized counseling or guidance from organizations inside or outside the school, including school counselors or outside counselors, or to learn from outside the public school educational facility. So when we made the survey, 61.7% had consulted the various counseling or guidance, received guidance from various organizations. So in 2023, in March, based on the situation of increasing unattending pupils, we created a COCOLA plan aiming to ensure no child will be left unable to access learning due to non-attendance to schools. There are three pillars. One is to ensure learning opportunities for all non-attending pupils and students and establish an environment where they can learn whenever they wish to. The second aim was not to overlook the small warning signals of children and provide support through the school team. The third aim is through an in-depth understanding of school climate. Well, school climate was discussed by Dr. Santiago earlier on, but through understanding of the school climate, we will achieve school as a place where everyone can learn with peace of mind. So with these three pillars in mind, we are trying to provide the support to non-attending students. The first pillar, to secure diversified locations of learning. Depending on the situation of the students, we will provide the learning environment for them. In the upper left, we are trying to create in-school educational support centers that's within school. The student may not be able to go to their classroom, but if it's outside of their classroom, they may be able to come to the school being relaxed. So we are promoting the setting up of in-school educational support centers. 50% of the public elementary and junior high schools have in-school educational support centers. Second is on the right, places outside schools where children can feel at home. Those students may not be able to come to school, but they are able to go to places outside the schools to learn. There are approximately 1,800 educational support centers nationwide. Below that is schools for the diversification of learning. Dr. Santiago talked about curriculum earlier on. But in the schools for diversification of learning, the unattending students would be able to learn based on a special curriculum. They customized for those students' needs. There are 59 schools for the diversification of learning in Japan. In the lower left, there is online learning at home. The students in Japan have been provided tablets, one tablet per student. So using those devices, the students would be able to learn online by accessing the classroom through those devices. The second is supporting the students through the teams which have been created at school. So one initiative being taken through this plan is early detection of changes in mental or physical conditions. So using the devices which has been provided to the students, the schools may be able to capture the early signs of help that the students are asking for. The school counselors, school social workers, and the relevant school workers would form a team to support those students. Also, we will be supporting the parents and guardians of non-attending pupils and students. The third pillar, creation of attractive schools. We want to create an environment where children would look forward to come to schools and be active. So we are creating tools to visualize the situation at schools. By grasping the objective status of the schools, we would be able to improve those schools. So in-depth understanding of the school climate is one thing, and improvement of classes must also be done so that it would be more enjoyable to learn. And the third is reviewing of school rules. The children should be involved in the creation of the rules that they would be subjected to. So those are the initiatives in which that we are conducting in Japan. After COVID, the number of non-attending students are increasing. To counter that, we have created the Kokoro Plan, and we are trying to promote the learning for everyone with no one left behind. So with that in mind, we will receive more presentations after mine, but that would also be followed by the panel discussions. So we will be talking about the backgrounds for the increase in the non-attending pupils and students, and what kind of initiatives each country is taking to counter this issue, and also in order to support the parents, what kind of initiatives are taken in each jurisdiction. So from the perspective of safe environment for the children, what kind of initiatives are being taken? And what are the common elements in non-attendance countermeasures across different countries? What can be applied to the efforts of other countries? So those are some of the things I would hope to discuss in the panel discussion. So that will be all for the explanation of the Japanese situation. There will be further presentations from various countries. Thank you very much.
Next, from the United States, Rhode Island, Department of Education, RIDE, Chief of Innovation, Improvement and Data. I would like to invite Mr. Brian Darrow to talk about the measures to promote attendance at Rhode Island. He'll be joining us online. Over to you.
Arigato. Thank you first and foremost to the Ministry of Education for inviting Rhode Island to speak on this critical issue. On behalf of Commissioner Infante Green and the Rhode Island Department of Education, we are excited to share with you some of the lessons learned and strategies we've used to improve student attendance. I apologize that we can't be there in person, but we are grateful and humbled for this opportunity. For some quick context, the United States and Rhode Island defines chronic absenteeism as missing 10% of the school year. So if you think in Rhode Island, we have about 180 school days. It's missing 18 days of school, or at least 2 days per month. As you heard from Japan and the OECD, chronic absenteeism skyrocketed during the pandemic, and approximately 1 out of every 3 students was chronically absent. But since we've put in place our Attendance Matters Rhode Island strategy, which I will talk about more in depth, we've seen significant improvements. The percentage points of our chronic absenteeism has reduced by 12 percentage points. And the reason why this matters is since the height of the pandemic, improved attendance means more instructional time. And we've recovered close to about 3.7 million hours of instructional time. These 2 graphs just highlight that point even further. You'll see at the height of the pandemic, close to 50,000 students, or 1 out of every 3, were chronically absent in our state. Through our statewide efforts, we've seen consistent declines, and there's now 17,000 fewer students from the height of the pandemic through the 24-25 school year. And we measure the total number of absences that we have across all students. And we see year-over-year trends where we have fewer and fewer absences. And because of that, we're proud to say that we've recovered almost close to 3.7 million more instructional hours by having close to 667,000 fewer absences. The way we've done this is through our statewide Attendance Matters campaign. I'm going to talk more about these efforts, but it really involves 3 key elements. First, we have statewide all-in communications where everyone across the state, from our governor to our education commissioner to classroom teachers and community members and business leaders, all talking to families and parents and students saying that attendance matters. We leverage some real-time innovative data to understand the trends in chronic absenteeism and provide tools and resources to school leaders and communities to improve attendance. And then we provide dynamic supports both to students as well to schools. And we do this, as you'll see in the graph in the middle, using kind of this all-in team approach. I think that all-in approach is critical because improving attendance can't just be the responsibility of schools, departments of education. It really needs to be a whole community effort. And so in 2023, we launched our Attendance Matters campaign, and this started with top-down messaging from Governor McKee and Education Commissioner Infante Green. So everybody from the top was saying attendance is a priority, and we all need to be focusing on this. As part of this campaign, we had a multimedia effort. We had videos of senators, sport athletes, community members, doctors, everyone talking about attendance mattering. We had radio advertisements. We had billboards that cars drove by. We were all saying that attendance mattered. We formed a statewide chronic absenteeism working group that actually just met again last week with the governor. This includes businesses, community leaders, city leaders, again, bringing together everybody to have a consistent message. And we name that message on a weekly basis when we recognize who has improved attendance. And all of this is published. I encourage you to go to our website, attendancemattersri.org. Now that we have everyone's attention that attendance matters, we've created some innovative tools to bring data into actionable insights for school leaders. As the OECD mentioned, different countries have different data collections. We have an infrastructure where we get daily attendance records from every single school. This dynamic capacity allows us to create dynamic tools. The first tool on your left is our real-time chronic absenteeism leaderboard. This is publicly available, and we rank every single school by the percentage of students who are projected to be on track to be chronically absent. We show both their percentage right now, their percentage last year, so we can see if folks are making an improvement, and it is ranked. This does a couple of key things. First, this makes the data accessible and transparent to the community. Second, because everyone likes competition, this creates some competitive spirit amongst our schools where they're trying to see where they are ranked compared to their peers, and they are reflecting what are strategies they need to do and put in place to improve their rankings. And third, as I mentioned, from that all-in communication messaging, we go back to this leaderboard on an ongoing basis. This might be, and I'm not joking when I say, one of our governor's most frequently visited websites. And I've been in meetings where he has pulled this up and called mayors and asked mayors, what are you doing to support schools in your communities to improve these numbers? When we developed this to be externally facing, we also developed a back-end tool for schools. Schools get this data and can break down and see who their chronically absent students are at an individual student record. We then created a nudge tool where, using behavioral theory and science, schools can send a text message or a letter to families to say, hi, did you know your student is on track to be chronically absent? Here are some strategies and supports in place to get back on track with attendance. The second visualization on your right is a new tool we released this year. It's our school calendar attendance heat map. The idea for this actually came from our chronic absenteeism working group, where we received questions on what were the attendance trends throughout the year. So we took all of our data And now at the state level, at a district level, and at a school level, schools can see their entire academic year broken down by attendance on a daily basis. Green days are schools where there is really good attendance. Red days were schools where there was really high absenteeism rates. This allows schools to see clear trends throughout the year, such as in January and February, when we know families and students have more medical issues. Schools can start planning now in December on how they can address those. We also see more absences around Mondays and Fridays. So schools can look, we've already had conversations with superintendents where they love this tool because they can see their trends from last year and proactively plan to improve attendance or about that same time this year. We've also started releasing this heat map for the current school year, and we do that on a monthly basis. So we can see how we are already improving attendance through September and October. Over 90% of the school days had either the same or improved attendance rates. Another way we look at data is connecting data directly with academic results. We don't talk about absenteeism in a silo. Every time we release assessment results, we talk about the impact of absenteeism on student achievement, and we release data tools and visualizations to make this tangible and accessible and interactive for schools and communities. So for example, on your right, you'll see a bar graph, which we have online, and we show that students who are never chronically absent graduate our high school in approximately 4 years. That's the bar to your left. But the bar to the right is students who are chronically absent 4 years in a row. Their graduation rate falls to below 60% in 4 years. We see that when we release our assessment results, students who are not chronically absent perform at rates almost 2 times higher than our absent students. We also, I've mentioned graduation, we also see the impact and show in our data that the impact of chronic absenteeism starts in kindergarten. And we see that if you're chronically absent in kindergarten, by the time you get to 3rd grade, your performance has on average already declined by about 10 percentage points. And this already, if you're chronically absent in kindergarten, this impacts your graduation rates 12 years later. The most important thing, we also show that if you improve attendance, if you are chronically absent 1 year, but you get back on track the next year, there is a tangible, powerful impact. And we see that those who get back on track, their attendance rates improve by at least 7 to 10 percentage points on average. Once we have all of this data and we combine it with our all-in communications campaign, we've then thought through what are some of the innovative supports we can provide directly to students, and what are some of the supports we can provide to schools. So first, focusing on students. When we look at the data, and this has been hit on already, we see, especially after the pandemic, student mental health is a core issue of why students are absent, and that has increased because of the pandemic. With this data and this idea of how do we as a state activate partnerships to support schools, we've entered into mental health partnerships, one of them with an organization called Hazel Health. And through that partnership, we provide free telehealth mental health supports to every single student across the state, free at no charge to students. When thinking about how do we engage families, in some of our field testing with families, one of the things we realized is sometimes families don't even really understand or aren't tracking how absent their student is. And so they don't see necessarily how all of these absences add up throughout a year. So through a partnership with a local foundation, we actually have calendars of the entire school year printed on magnets, and we distribute them in multiple languages to every single family across Rhode Island. And so every family, including myself, I have up on my fridge where I can track the number of absences my child has throughout the year. This is a very clear, concrete way that families can understand how many absences their child has. We've also thought through what are the guidance we provide in terms of supports to schools. So we recently released guidance this year that was intentional about connecting how we think about multi-tiered supports for students, for absenteeism, and we connect those with supports for achievement. So this is a hand-in-hand conversation where school teams are thinking through how do we support and provide more intensive supports for students who are off track for both attendance and academic achievement. And lastly, we've also focused deeply this year on connecting with our medical experts, with our pediatricians, with our departments of health. When getting to the why of attendance matters and why this aligns to other sectors, in conversations with doctors, they said to us, if a kid is absent, most likely they're at home and not doing something healthy. We see that also kids who are absent have negative lifelong consequences potentially related to obesity and asthma and other illnesses. So we are working hand in hand with our doctors and with our Department of Health experts to bring in pediatricians, to bring in school nurses, to be part of our efforts at schools. So principals are connecting with pediatricians to think about how to address and reduce medically related absences. When we think through connecting and supporting schools, ultimately, our question is, how do we build capacity then within schools to focus on attendance and improve attendance? One way we do this is through our communications campaign. We want everyone to be aligned. We've actually set goals at the state level, at the district level, and at the school level. So every single district school leader knows what their goal is for attendance on an annual basis, and they can action plan on what they need to do to meet those goals. We've seen a critical element where schools are successful improving attendance is if they have data-driven attendance teams. And those are attendance teams at the individual school level who are consistently reviewing data on what students are absent, connecting those students with interventions within their schools. And then we see those teams as well at the district level who are monitoring what is happening at the school level and supporting schools with community partnerships. We also know there are examples of excellence across the entire state. So rather than the state necessarily uplifting all of those areas of excellence, we've created a spotlight series where we have principals sharing best practices with other principals. With these attendance teams in place, we have focused a lot on our professional learning offerings, and we are building their capacity to support students with mental health and connecting that with student attendance. We are focused on building capacity, especially in our lowest performing schools, because we know schools who have a chronic absenteeism rate of almost over half their kids and have incredibly low performance rates. If they want to improve their academic performance, step one is they need students in school learning. And as we build capacity, we also create free professional learning opportunities available to attendance teams, school leaders, and frankly, any teacher who wants to take advantage and learn more about what they can do to improve student attendance. And so just providing a quick recap, it's really throughout these three efforts, we've been able to improve our chronic absenteeism by almost 3.7 million more instructional hours. It is absolutely important that everyone is communicating in one voice that attendance matters. It's not just, can't be the responsibility of schools to communicate that message. We need everyone invested, on board, and aligned. And the more partners we have in sharing that message, the more trusted messengers there are beyond just the Department of Education. It's incredibly powerful when business leaders, when faith leaders are also talking about how much attendance matters. We connect that messaging with real-time innovative data. And this data uplifts the impact of why attendance matters in terms of student achievement and the impact it has on student achievement. And we take this real-time data and create actionable tools for school leaders and district leaders and community leaders to have concerted efforts to focus on improving attendance. And then with that messaging in place and those dynamic supports in place, we focus on providing real-time supports to students and to schools. And by providing these supports, we've seen our chronic absenteeism consistently be reduced. And I'm proud to say, even through this school year, over 80% of our schools already have chronic absenteeism rates at better rates this year than they were at the exact same moment in time in December last year. It's been some incredibly exciting efforts to see, and we are excited to continue these efforts and share any insights we have to help advance this critical international conversation. At this point, that concludes my presentation. Again, I wish I could be there in person, but I'm excited to continue this discussion in the panel and encourage anyone who has questions to please review our website, attendancematters.ri.org, and we have an email address, theattendancematters@ri.ri.gov. Feel free to reach out, and we're happy to connect if at all helpful. Thank you for your time, and this concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brian Darrow. And next, from the UK, Department of Education, Director for Educational Engagement, Access and Wellbeing, we have Ms. Sophie Taylor, who will share with us about the school attendance in England. You have the floor.
Arigato. Good afternoon. My name is Sophie Taylor. I am the Director for Educational Engagement, Access and Wellbeing in the Department for Education in England. And school attendance is part of my brief, along with various other things that some of the speakers have already talked about today. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and I just wanted to start off by thanking the government of Japan and MEXT for putting on this event and for their hospitality and for inviting us. This is such an important topic, such a brilliant conversation to be having, and I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion, to learning from other governments and to sharing some of the experiences that we have had in England in order that we can improve this problem internationally. I was going to touch on 5 areas today. First of all, how the system is set up in England and how we're defining absenteeism. Second, things that have changed since the COVID pandemic. Thirdly, what the main drivers of absence are in England, both inside and outside of school. Talk a bit about our response to that, our sort of support-first approach, how we're using data, how we're using links to wider services, and then finally, talk about the progress we've made and areas for further improvement. And I would spend some time majoring on what we're doing on data and also on parental attitudes. So this is broadly how the system is set up in England, and there are various actors in the system: parents, schools, local government and central government. So it's parents' responsibility to secure a suitable education for their child and to secure their attendance at school. Schools, there's 22,000 schools, state-funded schools in England. They have the responsibility for recording the sessions. There's a morning session, an afternoon session, 190 days, 380 sessions a year, and they have the responsibility for recording whether students are present, absent, or late. And that is set out with a standard set of codes. So every school in the country uses the same code to record whether a child, for example, is away from school because they're ill, because they're to religious observance, because their family have taken them on holiday within term time. So we've really had the benefit of schools recording this information in the same way. Then we have local government. So it is their job to work with schools, and they also crucially run wider services, including things like children's services, social care. They run some of the schools in England directly, although the vast majority of schools, particularly secondary schools, are run by trusts, which are charities that run groups of schools. And so local government and those trusts are key partners for central government. And then finally, central government, which is where I and my team work, are responsible for setting the overall policy and setting the overall legislative framework and making sure that everything in the system works as it should and that the accountability is in the right place. So it's really crucial that all of those partners work together. And within that, we have set, and this is quite similar to what some of our partners today have talked about, but different in other cases, we have thresholds for different types of absence. So overall absence is, as it says on the tin, the overall number of days that are being missed across the education system. Then we have persistent absence, which is where a child is missing 10% or more days, so that accounts for 19 days across a school year. And then severe absence, where a child is missing more than 50%, so where a pupil is absent from school more than they are in. So here we can see the picture of what was happening before COVID. Absence was falling in all categories. Slight increases after 2014, but broadly falling and then stable. And then obviously there was this huge shock with the COVID pandemic, which massively increased absence. And you can see that into this year, it has started to fall, but there is clearly a long way to go for us to get back to pre-pandemic levels. This was the biggest shift in a generation. You can see on the right-hand side some of the impacts that we know that not attending school has. So there's a very obvious impact on educational attainment. If you are absent for 10 days in year 11, which is the last year of high school in England, that halves your chances of getting good exam passes in English and maths. Our analysts have done a calculation of lost lifetime earnings, and each day missed between the ages of 11 and 16 accounts for a loss of £750 in future earnings per day. We know that there's a huge impact on children's mental health from not being in school, and also there's impact on crime as well. Excuse me. In addition, there are implications for children's safeguarding, for particularly vulnerable children of not being in school. We know that for mental health, it's a sort of two-way street. Poor mental health can make young people less likely to attend school. Not attending school can also exacerbate some pupils' mental health difficulties. And then finally, it's a challenge for teachers to have large levels of absence, or particularly sporadic absence, because at any one time a teacher can have children in a class who are at various different levels of understanding of the curriculum, and that creates pressures on a workforce that is already under pressure. This chart is, I think, probably our favourite chart, and really serves to show how the attendance problem is a sort of a kind of two-pronged problem. Firstly, there's the problem on the left-hand side of the chart, which is children missing, lots of children missing a small number of days, which has increased which has increased post-pandemic. And then at the right-hand side of the chart, you can see that there's a much smaller number of children, but who are missing a very large amount of school. So currently, over 170,000 children in the UK are absent, in England rather, are absent more than they're in. And 1.5 million pupils are missing more than 10% of their education. The drivers of these two different types of absence are different, and so it's really important that we tackle them differently, both at the volume end and at the chronic end. And some of them, we find the first problem, the sort of volume problem, is a problem that schools themselves can tackle, and we have been encouraging schools through some of our data tools to tackle those that issue themselves. And then the acute end requires much more use of wider services, in particular social services and other services to work together, health, etc., to make sure that that problem is tackled holistically. But seeing it as two separate problems, which are interconnected but have different drivers and different solutions, has been really important to the approach that we've taken in England. We've done a bit of a segmentation here of the sorts of things that we think are driving absence within schools. I'm going to talk a bit more in more detail at a slide at the end about parental attitudes, but there is generally society has changed its attitudes, in particular to illness. So we're finding that the threshold that people have for keeping their children off school with an illness is much lower than it used to be. And we have a hypothesis that some of this might be linked to the increased culture in England of working from home, in a way where people are, used to be, before they could work from home, less able to, for their children to take a day off because it meant them taking a day off work. Whereas now with the increase in home working, it's perhaps easier for parents to have a child who's maybe not very well at home, and that rather than have to send them to school. I've talked a bit about some of the problems in the middle column, so reasons why children might not want to go to school, and I think this has come up in a couple of the presentations and is an area where we probably need to put a bit more of our focus and a bit more of our thinking in terms of whether children are happy in school, whether there are problems with bullying. Paolo talked about problems with safety and children feeling safe, whether or not children might have fallen behind and think, well, I'm so far behind, there isn't really any point going to school because I won't be able to catch up the learning that I've lost. We know that children with special educational needs in particular have struggled to get the right support. In England, we know that children with mental health difficulties can struggle to get the right support. There are quite long waiting lists in some parts of the country, very long waiting lists. And I talked before about the kind of interrelationship between poor mental health and being able to attend school, but also not attending school, sometimes exacerbating those problems. And then there are some much wider societal issues that schools can't fix. So poverty, homelessness, insecure housing, some of those issues which we know make it really difficult for children to attend school and for their families to support them to do so. So here is a bit about what we've done about this, and we have definitely pushed the notion that our approach is a support-first approach. So we come at all of the problems from supporting young people to attend, supporting families to help their children attend, and we have set out in statutory guidance what we want different actors in the system to do, and made those expectations stronger. We've linked to this a daily data tool, which has been transformational for us. I talked at the beginning about the fact that schools record their absence in a very structured way, and that made it possible for us to first voluntarily and then in a mandated way get schools to share their data with us. So every school in the country shares their attendance data, which they collect on a management information system that comes to the Department for Education, and we have been able to filter that back to them with some cuts of the data, some analysis, and some real-time reports, which I'll take you through a little bit later. And we also publish that data on a fortnightly basis. So we were able to just see, whereas we used to publish data 3 times a year, we're able to see much more in real time what's happening with absence data, which has been super valuable. And I think we've been able to help schools get insights that they didn't have before. We've also focused on practical support for schools, so where we talk about attendance and behaviour hubs, that's an approach where where the best schools help other schools spread best practice. So they come together with like a lead school that's doing really well and some other schools that need to learn a bit more. And it's an approach of the best leading the rest, and crucially, the system leading itself. So it's practitioners, leaders, teachers, giving advice to others rather than that kind of coming from central government, which has been really important. We've done some regional support, so my team and colleagues within the department ran conferences in all the different regions of England, bringing together secondary head teachers, talking them through our approach. People were able to share some of the challenges that they were facing and some of the solutions. Central government's obviously in a position where we can garner support from other parts of the system. So we've worked with the housing department on things like making sure that housing authorities consider school attendance when they're rehousing families. We've worked with the health department to make sure that family doctors know about the attendance problem and, for example, don't try not to schedule doctor's appointments during the school day. All the things that we know can affect absence. Rhode Island, we're talking about comms. I wish we had a communications campaign that was as good as theirs, but we have done quite a lot as well on communication and particularly trying to amplify the importance of attendance. That sense that every day you miss at school matters was something that was a bit eroded during the pandemic because governments were forced to ask people not to attend school. So then maximising the message that it was really important to be there was difficult, but we've done quite a lot on communications and a bit like Rhode Island, tried to get that message to come from lots of different places, not just central government. And then finally, we've done something to modernise what we do on enforcement. So we do have a system of fines in England where parents can be fined if their children don't attend school. This tends to be used for when parents deliberately take their children on holiday. That's pretty much the only area where it's used, but we knew that before the pandemic, it was used in quite different ways in different parts of the country. So tried to standardise that so that it's much fairer in the way that it's used in different parts of the country. And as I said at the beginning, really emphasise that the principle of support first, support for families, and support for children. So what has this led to? I showed a version of this chart earlier, but as you can see with the lines on the right-hand side, we are seeing some improvements. So overall, absence fell to 6.9%. Persistent absence fell to 18.7%. So like 140,000 fewer pupils missing 10% or more of their education. And that all collected has led to 5 million more days of children in school than we had in the previous academic year. But obviously looking at the lines on the left-hand side, still quite a long way for us to go. And in the data, we've been able to see some of the drivers of what's caused these improvements. So we've seen more gains in secondary, which is positive because that's where we see where progress had been slower, and we know that attendance gets worse as young people get older, and there's a specific challenge of children who transition between the phases, so from primary to secondary. So it's really pleasing to see some improvement in secondary. And we've seen that some regions are narrowing the gaps between other regions, so parts of the country that were doing less well catching up more quickly than some of the areas that were doing better. And we've seen disadvantaged children also improving their attendance rates at a higher rate, which is, again, an area that we were really worried about. So there's some things in here to be positive about. Severe absence, the line at the bottom on the right, is the most worrying. That's still a very large number of children who are missing over 50% of their education. And as I've said, their causes of absence are some of the most challenging to tackle. I mentioned I was going to come back a bit to some of the things that we've been doing on data. So if you can see here, this is one of the things that we've developed through our data tool. And this is a report that we now produce for every single school in the country. And it breaks down for them what they might need to do with their absence. So on the left-hand side, it just sort of shows them what their attendance looks like, what their persistent looks like. And crucially, it compares them to similar schools. So it would take schools that were, for example, similarly rural or similarly urban, similar sized, similar percentages of disadvantaged children, so that schools know that they're comparing their situation with the situation of another school that's similar to theirs. And then in the middle column, it shows them the comparators over time with those types of school. And then on the third page, it shows them some of their strength areas and some of the areas where they can improve. And going again to the sort of notion of support first, we found it's really important to highlight areas of strength at the same time as highlighting areas of improvement. And some of the areas of improvement can get really granular. So a bit like colleagues have mentioned, being able to say, oh, you know, you have an attendance problem on a Friday, or, you know, lots of children are late on Wednesday morning, might lead a school to look into why that is, and might, you know, they might see that like a local bus route isn't running on a Wednesday or something like that. So it gives them really, really granular insights, which are really helpful. And the other thing I just wanted to touch on is, having looked at all of these different school tools, you can then start to see what things create, what elements of a school can create really good attendance, and what it looks like in practice. So we've used all of this to create like a toolkit. There's a link to that in the top right-hand corner of the slide, but to sort of show schools like what are the ingredients of a school that can do this really well, and therefore how can you create some of those ingredients. And a lot of that is around leadership and vision, children feeling really welcome, you know, even simple things like being greeted in the morning by their first name, people saying, oh, it's really nice to see you, or if children were off the day before, saying it's really nice to have you back, engaging well with families, collaborating with wider services, all of these things that are like really replicable, and where we've tried to make it so that schools can see that there are actual practical actions that they can take to help improve their attendance. And then the last thing I said I'd come back to, which I just wanted to touch on, and I think is one of the biggest challenges we're facing, is around parental attitudes. And I talked earlier about, you know, the volume problem and the acute problem, and some of these parental attitudes are different depending on different ends of the spectrum. But we have seen across the piece, across all types of parents, a lowering of the threshold, as I said, at which people will keep their children off school for an illness. I mentioned before about the link to working from home. We know that we've had to work on some of our messaging. We've worked with some of the messaging on things like term time holidays, where we know that one of the drivers for that is that parents choose to take their children out of school because holidays in holiday time are much more expensive than holidays in other times. So using this insight and making sure that that schools are in the best possible place to support parents, but also that parents understand that their children not being in school can affect their life's chances, and also can affect the chances of other children in the class. Going back to what I was saying about how hard it is to teach a class where children are at various different levels of learning and understanding. So those were all the things. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the things that we've been doing. I think my sort of overall summary would be like we've made some progress. There's still quite a long way to go. And it's really great, therefore, to be in a situation where we can learn from our partners in other countries and to be able to collaborate internationally to see what some of the themes are so that we can tackle this problem together. I just wanted to extend my thanks again to MEX and to the Japanese government for having us. I think we have a really good opportunity collectively to make sure that schools and governments have the right tools that they need to support families and ultimately to support young people to be able to be in the classroom, learning, achieving, thriving, having good relationships and improving their prospects for the future. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Many thanks. Arigato.
Thank you, Director Taylor. Next, I would like to invite Director Linda Brain, who is the head of department for Norwegian Directorate for Education and Training, to talk about the current status in Norway as well as the countermeasures.
Arigato and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Linda Brain and I am a Department Director of the Norwegian Directorate for Education and Training. On behalf of Norway, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak at this important event and to contribute to this important conversation. The Norwegian Directorate for Education and Training operates under the Ministry of Education and has the overall responsibility for supervising kindergarten education and the governance of the education sector, as well as the implementation of acts of parliaments and regulations. At the national level, in addition to legal measures, we also have economic and pedagogical measures. And the public school is a cornerstone of the Norwegian welfare state, and the objective is to ensure that all pupils and children and apprentices receive the high-quality education they are entitled to. And through this keynote, I will first outline the framework of the Norwegian education system. Next, I will describe the current situation and the challenges associated with it before finally addressing political measures to meet these challenges. The issue of absenteeism is both timely and significant as it touches on the well-being, development, and future opportunities of children and young people. In Norway, the focus on absenteeism in politics and the governmental level intensified significantly after the pandemic. Our understanding and discourse around this phenomenon have evolved considerably, and there has been a deliberate shift from using terms such as school refusal and involuntary school absence to consistently referring to worrying school absenteeism. And from the perspective of the Norwegian Directorate for Education and Training, this is a well-considered and intentional choice. And we understand worrying absenteeism as worrying from the social and academic community at school, documented or undocumented, which may have consequences for pupils' social and academic belonging and development. And this understanding emphasizes the consequences rather than the causes, unlike the term school refusal. Using a term that is not limited to a single cause allows for a more nuanced and complex discussion. In Norway, we emphasize the importance of taking a broad approach to absenteeism and conducting through assessments in each individual case. And the reason for absence are many and complex, and research mainly distinguish between individual, family-related, and school-related causes. And from the Norwegian context, we know that school-related factors are lack of good and safe environments and lack of adapted education. We believe that having a focus on attendance is necessary, and we are looking at how schools can prevent absenteeism by implementing measures that foster pupils' sense of belonging, motivation, and well-being at school. The state, through the Ministry of Education and Research and the Norwegian Directorate for Education and Training, sets the national goals, the curricula, and legal frameworks, but implementation is largely decentralized. And this local self-governance allows municipalities and counties to adapt educational services to local needs and conditions, while still operating within a national framework. It reflects Norway's broader commitment to democratic participation and trust in local decision-making. And the Norwegian school system is structured into 3 main parts. The elementary or the primary school is covering grade 1 to 7, lower secondary school covering grade 8 to 10, and upper secondary school, which prepares pupils for higher education or vocational training. Kindergarten is a preschool institution that is not compulsory, but the attendance is almost universal. So last year, 94.4% of children in the age of 1 to 5 attended kindergarten. And the school system is built on a principle of local autonomy. And that is a defining feature of the Norwegian model, is that municipalities serve as school owners for primary and lower secondary schools, and the counties serve as school owners for upper secondary schools. And this means that they are responsible for the funding, the administration, and quality assurance of schools within their jurisdiction. In Norway, we have a holistic and collaborative approach to support children and young people in education. That means that we emphasize coordinated efforts of professionals from different sectors who work together to ensure that each pupil receives the support they need to succeed in school and life. This may include teachers, school leaders, school health services, educational and psychological services, and the welfare service must collaborate when collaboration is necessary to provide the child or young person with a comprehensive and coordinated service. And since absenteeism is complex and multifaceted, it is also important to place it in a childhood perspective and in many cases mobilize the team around children and young people. The Norwegian goals for the compulsory education and upper secondary education and training are that all pupils shall have a good and inclusive learning environment, that children and young people who need help should get it early, and everyone shall develop their potential. Employees in the knowledge sector shall have a high level of competence, and all pupils shall succeed in education and training. The Norwegian Education Act governs primary and secondary education and training, including after-school programs and follow-up services. It ensures the right to free and inclusive education for all children and young people and outlines the responsibilities of schools, municipalities, and the state. The Act emphasizes adapted education, early intervention, and equal opportunities, aiming to promote learning, well-being, and democratic values. It also includes provision on language rights, special education, pupil participation, cooperation between home and school, and the right to a safe and good school environment. It is relevant in this forum to emphasize regulations that we consider especially relevant to absenteeism. Firstly, we have Chapter 12 of the Education Act on the school environment for pupils, which gives all pupils the right to a safe and good school environment that promotes health, inclusion, well-being, and learning. And it's the pupils' subjective experience as to how they perceive the school environment that is decisive for whether the school has fulfilled this basic right. And there are twofold requirements for what the school must do to ensure this right: its obligations in a broader preventive sense and obligations in handling individual cases. And the Education Act, Section 10(6), also imposes an obligation on municipalities and county municipalities to follow up on pupils who are absent from education. This follow-up obligation applies to all types of absenteeism, starting from the first day a pupil is absent from education. And the follow-up obligation is not limited to all high or prolonged absenteeism. All absenteeism that a pupil has from education must be followed up. It is also included in the law that the county municipalities shall ensure that pupils have a safe and good transition from secondary school to upper secondary education, and the county municipality shall cooperate with the municipality on this. The national curriculum is a regulation under the Education Act. In the curriculum framework, there is a core curriculum that describes values and principles that should characterize the pedagogical practice throughout basic education and the cooperation between home and school. Examples of values is human dignity, identity, democracy, equality, and participation. Furthermore, the schools should contribute to social learning and development through work with subjects and in everyday school life. The pupil's social learning and development is a central principle. Examples of principles that should characterize the school's practice include developing an inclusive learning environment where pupils learn to respect differences and understand that everyone has a place in the community. Another central principle is public health and life skills. This is an interdisciplinary topic through which the school provides pupils with competence that promotes good mental and physical health. A third central principle is teaching and differentiated instruction, which means that school shall facilitate learning for all pupils and stimulate each pupil's motivation and make the pupils feel as successful learners. In Norway, we have the legal authority to collect individual level data on absences for pupils in 10th grade, which is in lower secondary school and throughout upper secondary education. However, there is a progress now in making it possible to collect individual level data for primary education for the 1st grade and up to 9th grade in lower secondary education. And statistics from the past year show that absenteeism is still on the rise and the negative trend continues. So absenteeism among 10th grade pupils is increasing. Pupils' absences, both in terms of days and hours, have risen. In the 2024-25 school year, 10th grade pupils typically had 9 days and 8 hours of absence, and this represents an increase of 3 days and 3 hours compared to the 2018-19 year. The median absence for girls is 1 day and 2 hours higher than for boys. 18% of pupils have 20 or more days of absence in 24-25, and this is 9 percentage points higher than in 2018-2019. And for upper secondary school, absenteeism has increased for pupils here as well, both in hours and days. In the most recent school year, the median pupil had 5 days and 20 hours of absence recorded on their diploma. Compared to 2018-19, this is an increase of 2 days and 9 hours. The median absence for girls is 1 day higher than for boys. 11% of pupils have 20 or more days of absence in 24-25, and this is 5 percentage points higher than in 2018-19. So obviously there's a challenge that we don't have individual level data on absence for all pupils from the 1st grade, but all schools are required to record pupils' absenteeism. Municipalities and county municipalities must have a system in place for tracking absenteeism. Only the absenteeism of 10th grade pupils and upper secondary school pupils are available to the national authorities. However, establishment of an individual data registry is in process. And we are aware that lack of safe and good environment and adapted education are 2 main reasons for absenteeism, so it's important to promote an attendance perspective and focus on these factors. And it's crucial for schools to take preventive measures to ensure regular attendance. Absenteeism is a prominent topic in the public debate in Norway. Several policy initiatives and regulatory changes have been introduced in recent years to address the issue, aiming to reduce absenteeism and ensure that all pupils receive the education they are entitled to. I will now briefly present these 6 policy measures. First, we have the duty to follow up, which I've already mentioned, that the municipality and the county authority shall ensure that pupils who are absent from instruction receive follow-up. This duty came into an effect 1st of August 2024 and applies from the first day of absence, regardless of the reason or duration. And the aim is to promote school attendance and prevent worrying absenteeism, thereby supporting pupils in completing their education. And schools are encouraged to have systems for monitoring attendance, identifying patterns, and collaborating with families. And this obligation is a broader framework that includes responsibilities related to school environment, adapted education, and assessment regulations. An absence limit was introduced in upper secondary school in 2016. Pupils who exceed 10% of absence in any subject will not receive a grade in this subject, and they will not obtain a diploma without a grade in each subject. The principal may make exceptions if the reasons for the absence makes it clearly unreasonable to deny a grade, provided the absence is less than 15%. A 2020 evaluation revealed that this limit has contributed to reducing absenteeism across all pupils groups. However, a key finding was that the absent limit is unlikely to address the root causes of chronic absenteeism among pupils. In 2022, the ministry requested the Directorate to review and propose changes to the absence rules. And this autumn, some changes was made, but the 10% limit persists. The Norwegian government has established a public committee to assess and discuss the role of the common school in the society of the future. The committee will examine how the school should evolve to meet future demands and expectations, what children and young people need to learn to live meaningful lives, and what responsibilities the school should carry. It will also consider what changes are needed in the content, the scope, and organization of schooling to prepare pupils for the challenges ahead. And the committee is expected to deliver its recommendations by June 2026. And we also have this white paper called A More Practical School, which addresses declining learning outcomes, reduced motivation, lower well-being, increased bullying, and absenteeism among pupils in grades 5 to 10. The government proposes a national program to promote more practical learning and physical activity in schools. Unfortunately, this time is too short to give you in-depth insight into the measures in the white paper, but I will emphasize those initiatives that are directly related to prevent absenteeism. And one of them is a national absence register, which we are in the process of establishing. Such a register will collect data from schools and compile them in a register that will be accessible to the national authorities. And this register will include accumulated absence in days and hours of each pupil per school year, as well as their grade level. The process has just begun, and it's still uncertain when this register will be up and running. So we are quite jealous of UK and other countries who have more on this. And then the last measure I will present to you is the ongoing work in Norway on developing evidence-based guidelines on preventing and addressing school attendance problems. The aim is to give schools and municipalities and support services across the country clear, research-informed guidance on how to act to prevent absenteeism and how to act when a pupil struggles to attend school. Ultimately, the goal is to help professionals to make better decisions in complex situations and to support more children and young people in staying engaged in education. And this work is a joint national effort. Several key agencies collaborate to develop the guideline. the Directorate for Education and Training, the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, the Directorate of Health, the Directorate for Children, Youth and Families, and the National Support Service for Special Needs Education in Norway. The guidelines follow an international model for evidence-based guidelines, and this structured process ensures that the recommendations are trustworthy, they are transparent, and they are useful in practice. The method combines three perspectives: research evidence, professional experience, and the voice of users, young people, and their parents. And the process follows these steps. First, we define the scope of the guideline and the areas which the guideline will cover and not cover, and what it intends to achieve. Then we review the evidence relevant to the areas the guideline is to cover. We develop review questions that also help define literature searches, and then a systematic literature search is carried out and a summary of the evidence is prepared. The studies are quality appraised and presented to a committee, like an expert group, made up of practitioners, of professionals, parents, and pupils. And the committee considers the evidence and give advice when forming the recommendations. And the committee help us to consider the quality of the evidence. They give expert testimony and how they will be used in practice. Then point 3, the draft guideline is sent for public consultation, and the developers then consider the comments from stakeholders and agrees in any changes. The revised version is reviewed and checked for quality. And then you must promote awareness and implement the guideline at the time of publication and afterwards, and then it's important to update the guideline regularly. And there are 5 questions, topics that's included in the scope of this guideline. And the first question is about school-home collaboration. And the research question is how to facilitate and promote effective school-home collaboration to prevent school absenteeism, and how to follow up on pupils with school absenteeism. And then the second question is about pupils' involvement, and what strategies and approaches can promote and ensure the involvement of children and young people across different support contexts when they receive support from one or more services. And then it's about academic, social, and organizational approaches to support pupils with concerning absenteeism. What evidence exists on effective or relevant academic, social, and organizational approaches for supporting pupils with concerning absenteeism in primary and secondary education. Question 4 is about the competence for the school staff in identifying and addressing school absenteeism. What research exists on competence among school leaders, teachers, and other school staff, as well as the educational and psychological counseling services and a school health service in the work of detecting, uncovering, and following up on absenteeism, and which areas of competence are emphasized or identified as needed. And then the last question is about collaboration within school and between school and other services for children and youth. And here we are looking at strategies and approaches that characterize effective internal collaboration within the school and between the school and other external services. Where are the barriers and what promotes collaboration, and what conditions are necessary for successful collaboration? And to ensure high quality in our evidence-based guideline, we have established a committee, as I said, an external advisory expert group to support our development work. And the expert group contributes with diverse knowledge, perspectives, and experiences, and represent a broad range of members and qualification and expertise. It's 27 people, and there are parents and pupils, researchers, and practitioners. And to strengthen the user insight, we also have conducted 11 interviews with children and young people experiencing school absenteeism. And furthermore, we draw on 5 existing Norwegian reports on children and young people's perspective on absenteeism. And these reports are an important addition to the research because they show us what participation looks like in practice from the perspective of those who experience it with their own voice. In summary, children and young people believe that participation must be taken seriously. Pupils must be asked, listened to, and believed. Safety and trust are basic needs for participation. Getting information is a right, and participation must give real influence, not only a chance to speak. And this guideline is to be published for public consultation in May 2026. And the ultimate goal is that these recommendations will help schools and services to act earlier, more consistently, and with a greater impact for pupils. Thank you for listening. Arigato.
Thank you very much, Director Brian.